Today we have Mr. Mohan Krishnan with us. Um, he doesn't need an introduction actually. You can just go to his LinkedIn profile and you will be amazed with the kind of a work and kind of a help Sir has actually done for a number of his startups. Besides, he has been a guest faculty at IITs, at IIMs, and at IIFT as well. Sir has got enormous amount of experience working in market research companies and also helping a number of his startups to scale up and actually helping them acquire their initial set of customers as well. I welcome you, sir, here, and thanks for taking out time on this weekday. And it is an enormous pleasure for all the people who are there inside the Memory Bits community to see you, to feel you, and then to listen to your views on a number of important things. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rishikesh. And first of all, my pleasure. And I just hope my parents were there when you were saying such glowing things about me. I am like you or all of you, a very regular, normal human being. Thanks again, and I hope I can share something useful for everybody, and we can use this time productively.
Thanks a lot, sir. But we are sure that we will make you proud, sir, one day or the other.
Thank you.
So we'll start with some of the basic questions which most of the people who are into the startup world or who are wanting to get into a startups or who are entering into the professional life, they wonder about and they want to listen it directly from you. How do you define an entrepreneur? Like as per you, what should be an ideal definition of an entrepreneur?
Okay, there are very many bookish definition. I will not get into that. I will just talk about something that comes from some experience of working with entrepreneurs. The first thing that I can say that stands out in an entrepreneur is that they have product or service or some idea that has great value in the for the consumers that they're targeting. It could be company, it could be individuals, but their idea is like some spark that they are very sure has a great market. Let me take one simple example. One entrepreneur I was helping, he had this great need to develop a very low cost stiff dish, what do you call, disposable a tray or plate that can be used by consumers in public places. And the closest one that he sort of found out are made from paper pulp. You can see if you go to Haldiram, you will see them serving it. But those required high cost machinery. He wanted to make this available at a very low cost from local machines with local material that can be easily sourced nearby, because he was really fired by this need to bring this product for saving the environment, right? Because he felt plastic cups, plastic trays, plastic plates, these are spoiling because these are cheaper, and he wanted to find ways that are cheaper than these, right? And allow greater number of entrepreneurs to even develop these products. So that's the first quality. So whoever I meet, and in fact I'm sure you empathize with this, all entrepreneurs are asked, what is your grand idea, right? And this idea has to be centered in the society, in its value. Even if it is, let's say, some AI product that has great value for a B2B, it should have some value, that is, ready and available. Only if you're a scientist, you can say that I am looking for, life in the universe. Would somebody fund it? Or we want to go to the moon to see whether there is really water, right? No, those are long shots, moonshot ideas that have, far out future. A good entrepreneur will see a market with a clear timing. That's I think the first one. Beyond that, if you ask me what is the next best capability an entrepreneur should have, which I've seen working with several, and many of them fail in that, is being able to take a great risk. Okay, it is a very hard feeling when you have 10-12 people and you don't know whether you have the money to pay for the next month. Okay, and you have some vendor who's asking for the money. most of us will begin to lie, begin to cheat, right? But to be able to carry this, to convince and then still find ways to extricate yourself, and these are, hard failures that we'll have to go through, and sometimes we'll fail. But being honest to oneself and being able to do that, that is a very difficult capability. Many people don't have this. This belly for risk is not very easy. I don't have it. Let's say, while I advise a lot of people, I don't have this capability. Let me be very frank. I can be, like a Krishna to Arjuna, but I am not the, archer here.
Yes, sir. That was the definition, that actually motivated me as well, because like you always motivate me, sir, with your thought process. Sir, I have got a very kind of a question which is coming to my mind. Why market research? Why did you choose market research as a career stream?
Okay, no, this is, there's nothing special in it. I come from a generation where we were all told study hard, and if you score well in maths, you should choose, engineering. Maybe you can drop biology. And if you're not so good in maths, maybe you can take biology and get into medicine. If you are not so good in both, they could see from your report card you are somewhere mediocre. They will start saying, why don't you learn some typing and shorthand? Because there were all these typing institutes nearby. At least you'll get a government job. Some, will push you to try for some clerical grade exam and all that. This is the aspiration of most middle class. Luckily, I did well in maths, I suppose, and I got into engineering and got into IIT. This is the stream that, my generation typically would be forced into. Nobody really had any great thought, what is going to be the future, because there was very little to choose from. And if at all, I lived in a, small suburban city outside Chennai, which is Tambaram, which is the Air Force, and I saw aeroplanes and I saw engineers who work there who will come, and therefore I thought, I should become a mechanical engineer and so on. We didn't have quota and all these, so maybe today if I tried JEE, I would have flunked, but luckily I got into IIT Delhi. And we all did engineering. After we finished engineering, there were, 3 options, which was like to do an MS in US with scholarship. Not like today, there were like parents who didn't have any money to sort of fund us to go to US, or do an MBA from any of the IIMs by taking CAT, or get into an engineering job. Again, engineering jobs were very scarce in the early 90s. The IT industry was just beginning to grow. In fact, you'll find it funny. Infosys was standing outside. It was not even in a proper placement, and they were trying to give jobs to many of us. We would have been probably the 80 people who were working in Jayanagar Infosys if you had joined. And they were actually begging many of us to join, and hardly anybody really joined at that time. I'm just telling that is the sort of nature of, nobody wanted to join startups and that in that time. So I got into MBA, unlike others. After a short stint working in, R&D, I did some R&D related work for rural India. That also helped me in some way. I did get a very big job in a very big company. But, when I went to take the, appointment letter, the fellow who was senior to me working there said, why are you joining here? The workers here beat you up. The management is terrible. I am trying to get away. You will die working here. So, that almost dissuaded me, and I joined an NGO as an engineer. And, within a year, I sort of did my MBA and joined. At the MBA Institute, I got excited by, psychology and, all these other areas about human behavior. In fact, I had this curiosity even in IIT. IIT had this 25 credits in humanities. So you could sort of, and these liberties IITs had as an environment. So you could take courses that were exciting. For me, psychology and economics were exciting courses. I took that even at IIT. So that interest flourished even in my MBA, and that is how I landed in a market research job. Somehow I felt, this would keep me, and I had this research interest as well. As I told you, my stopgap job between engineering and management was also, something in, R&D. So, that's how I landed up in market research. So it is, I don't think any of us, planned our career saying, oh, one day I will become a market researcher. But certain skills sort of built on itself, and the path led us to this. But having got into market research, I will say that it is an exciting career. I enjoyed it much, and I continue to enjoy it.
That is excellent. So you actually mentioned about psychology, sir, and so a lot of management consultancies have been guiding a number of companies. I personally have seen in my chota wala experiences that there's a number of all the big fours working
Mhm.
inside a big company. Let's say BCG,
Yes.
you name it, they are there. But many a times what happens is that, sir, most of the people who are inside the company, at management levels, they're not happy with their work, right? Many a times, they tell that they're not that much contributing enough. Maybe sometimes they are creating problems inside the processes which are there as such. What do you think is the reason behind it?
Okay. Any expert that is used will face some problem. I'm sure you hear the same thing about doctors. You will hear the same thing about lawyers. So it's very difficult to typecast everything as good or bad. So I'm going to avoid responding to that. Okay. There are like every industry, enough problems in the management consulting industry. While since I don't belong it, I do advise. Many of them use me for some work. I know how they work, but I would refrain from getting into detailed criticism without having worked inside those companies. But what I will say, especially in the context of marketing, okay, long back in 1996 or 97, I worked in a market research company called IMRB, which reported into the WPP. Now, WPP is one of the world's largest advertising and market research organization, pretty large with 1 lakh employees in some 150 countries and so on. Now, WPP's head at the time was Sir Martin Sorrell, and he was, he used to be pretty close to McKinsey and others and used to work with them. And he used to say that, while consulting companies are welcome into marketing, but they need to realize one thing, and marketing, unlike management consulting or, engineering or any other consulting field, is a mix of art and science. Okay, so marketing is not very easy to fit into 2x2 analytical rational boxes. And we as researchers also used to work a lot with ad agencies because, as I said, WPP is an ad and a marketing company, marketing communication company. So ad agencies typically would be very, very good at empathizing. You can see advertisers, creatives make very empathetic ad, with the right emotion and so on. And they will hate us when we will use rationality to explain why that ad will not work or why it will not fit into the life of a consumer and so on. So why I'm giving these two ends is that on the one hand, management, consulting gets too rational and analytical. On the other hand, ad agencies get too emotional and empathetic. Okay, and Buddha somewhere said, you need this mix and moderation. That is where market research comes in. It's a fine balance between system 1 and system 2 thinking. It's a now a very popular word to be used in in psychology nowadays because of Daniel Kahneman, who popularized it. System 1 is just intuitive or emotional thinking. Something that sort of more or less comes into our mind as soon as we hear it. And politicians use it quite a lot. You can see them. You can see how politicians bhadka us. They just excite us with some quick examples, and we get worked up, and and politicians love this emotional behavior in us. And many a times, if we sort of respond to things fast, it hurts us. But definitely, system 1 thinking helps us, especially if you're in the savannah and suddenly you see something red, and it's going to be probably a tiger, and you'll run away. So system 1 thinking is needed, useful in some conditions. System 2 thinking is deliberate, right? Now, these two thinkings are both required if you want to be successful in marketing, especially when you are giving solutions that are, grounded on facts. So, which is why, people complain. In those days, ad agencies used to do something called a vox pop. They will walk around meeting consumers, get a sense of what is happening in the emotions of consumers locally. But that sometimes that that little bit of research is not enough until unless you do a large enough sample research, and that is where rationality comes in. Similarly, management consultants many a time jump into rational conclusions about consumers or markets without having the practical knowledge of having walked into the ground and lived in the empathetic lifestyle of the people about whom they are advising what the company should do. Which is why there is a general complaint that these are not actionable advices, especially in marketing. I'm not talking about management. There are lots of other areas like strategy they might be very good in. But in saying this about management consulting companies or advertising agencies, all of them walking into market research area, you're missing one very important point. Nowadays, marketing has become more and more digital, scientific, with lots of maths and so on. Also important, right? So I've seen a flood of computer science graduates in this area, which is a very good thing. If you remember 10, 15 years ago, lots of, very smart people went into finance, into Wall Street. Lots of softwares were developed and so on and so forth. In the same way, now I see a flood of, people with very smart ability in algorithm and method getting into marketing and market research area. And it's welcome. All I'm saying is that we need this fine balance of science and art between emotion and rationality. If we can achieve it, I'm sure, it's going to be beneficial for everybody. I think everybody should be welcome into, something as broad as marketing. Peter Drucker somewhere said the reason for an organization to exist are only two things. One is to innovate, and second is to market, right? And what better than market research to understand marketing as a process?
That was so that was so knowledge enriching for me as well, sir. So I've got a question, right? Many times new startups, once they start going to the clients, once they start pitching it to the clients, or I can say once they start going to the clients telling that this is the problem that I can solve, many times, clients do reply to you telling that, you don't have a place inside the industry right now. Go back, establish a place, and then come to us. They're sometimes very rude, especially to the initial entrepreneurs. So how to handle these initial rejections, these initial insults, I would say, rather.
Okay, so in fact, in market research, whenever a young boy joins, he always comes to all of us as seniors and say, listen, Mohan, I tried to go and meet this person to get some information, because market research is all about listening to people and collecting information. And they will say, oh, that fellow was very rude, he threw me out, he just was, didn't even want to listen, and so on and so forth. So I told them that is a problem that I also faced as a youngster, but then I asked this question: why would anybody entertain me? And this is a question even this startup who goes to sell their product should also ask this question: why would they be willing to give this time? Okay. Now, the most important thing psychology teaches us is that everybody has some problem or the other, right? There's no human in this world without a problem, right? Just that no human wants to share their problem, right? Now, how do you break that barrier? Is to create a certain empathy with that person so that he opens to talk about his problem. And if you understood the problem and if your product or service matches that problem, then you have an opportunity. But the first stage is to build a certain level of trust, right? To be able to make that person speak to us, right? Now, that is the, hard lesson we have to learn. And there is no, I'm not now going to give you a next silver bullet answer that, here is what you should do to win the trust of the person. And it varies from person to person, okay? In one case, when I went to meet the person, I realized that he was, an expert in air conditioning. Okay, I simply went and said, I heard a lot about you. There is a person I met who said this thing about you, right? And I was so excited. I wanted to meet you to understand, how you have achieved this, right? And he spent half an hour talking to me on this. Okay. In another situation, when I went, he was an old man, and I spoke to him in Hindi. Okay, and I thought maybe he's not good in English, and I spoke to him in Hindi, and he didn't get angry with me, but he wanted to prove to me that while he may not look like a educated Englishman, he was actually very good in English, and he was a somebody who had an Oxford fluency in English. And he taught me a lesson. So he actually wanted to teach a young person how not to judge people, right? On something as simple as starting with an Hindi, So, and he was Delhi's greatest perfumer in the tobacco industry. Okay. So you don't know. Sometimes it can be accidentally, the trust can be established. Sometimes it can be established by some deliberate knowledge or pre-knowledge about the person. And once you establish the trust, you can actually begin to listen. Many a times youngsters go there and say, sir, we have this greatest widget, my product is cheaper, my product is better. And they start pitching again something, sir, maybe you are using Tally, mine is much better than Tally, it is half the price, it is cheaper, it is easier, right? People don't like that. People are not going to just in one conversation say, okay, we will reevaluate and not have Tally, right? So, this is why this failure happens. Establish trust, empathy, and understand their situation. Maybe in 2 meetings, you will be able to sell. It depends. You see, in B2B, the selling cycle is going to be long. So nobody is going to, in the first meeting, tell you, okay, let me sign. If it happens, you are lucky. It can happen. Somebody might just get, nice with you and feel a little, okay, let me help this young boy. But that doesn't happen all the time. I must also add, nowadays people are really stressed, right? There is lots of pressure on people, so they might just be a little rude out of it. How you can humor that situation and get out of it is also a quality you should develop, right? Humor without being, sometimes I've seen people humor by being, like a wisecrack. That can also hurt people. To bring a certain humility. India is a high power distance country. Power distance, by power distance, I mean that the other person thinks he's got, because you are a puny, and this is true in India. Okay. So you need to humor that guy. Somewhere you have to, make him the sir or great man or whatever. That's a opening, which is a problem for any foreigner who comes here. But, it's important here. I don't know when we will get out of this, when we will consider the other person as an equal, right? That ability is a little lower with us. When somebody comes, we think that person is smaller.
So India is a status-driven society, sir. Actually,
yes, that's what. Yeah, correct.
So we've got one question coming from Parijat. He's asked, there have been several times where I have had the choice to join a startup or an established organization. The complete package was, of course, better from big organization. Why should I join a startup?
Okay, now this is a tough question because it varies on the situation. I don't know Parijat and the situation, so let me therefore generalize it as a conceptual problem for everybody. It may or may not suit Parijat's specific situation. Let me preamble that. A large organization has one advantage, and it is a particular advantage. In fact, I go to IIT and help startups, and we do have a startup program there. And many students come from small town, humble background, and so on. And there is this whole pressure that you join a large company because the family feels, if you joined a large company, your life is settled. They can search for a bride or a groom for you, and so on and so forth. So because the family has a certain dream, and that has been imposed. And in a aspiring young country, this becomes very important. There is a lot of familial pressure. The family might be in a very tough situation. I recently helped a girl whose father is a gardener, right? To make her risk her life on something that is a startup, I would sort of probably desist her. Why don't you join for a few years, because I don't know how certain is the future of the startup. Okay, so these considerations are also important, right? Because at the end of the day, a society grows with each generation, building the next step for the next generation. I'm not saying that the family should have a dynastic way of looking at it, but that is how you become prosperous as a country. So that's from a familial perspective. But there is a company perspective. All large companies have more established processes. So, if you are the kind who can join large companies with this clarity of goal, there's no point joining a company which you don't like. I remember a student who called me, and I'm talking as early as 2001, when I realized, that's when Generation Y started hitting the market. Many of you are Generation Z as we call it. Generation Y, 1999, 2000 is when I saw them. And one person called me, sir, I got a job in Citibank. I said, very good, and this is in Bangalore. I said it even better because she's a lady, and I said it's even better because many young girls in North, prefer to move away from the family because it's very suffocating for a lot of young girls, all their lives being chaperoned and controlled. So, no, sorry, not Citibank. She said I've joined McDowell's. I got a job in McDowell's, not McDowell's. Sorry, UB, United Breweries. I'm really sorry, I forgot now. So United Breweries in Bangalore. I said no problem. It's a very good company. I don't know. Do you have any reluctance to join a liquor company? She said no, I have no problem. It's in marketing. I said it's wonderful. You can do well. You can learn a lot of things. But then she said, sir, while I am going to join, no problem. But I want to join Citibank, and if I leave this job, after a year, would Citibank consider this as an experience? So I told her that, listen, on the one hand, you are not even getting into a marriage, and you are going to marry, and you're thinking about the next person you will marry, and whether this marriage will help you do better with the next marriage, right? So this sort of butterfly effect of dilly dallying from one to the other is not a good thing. So if you're joining marketing, you should say I will join UB and be a good marketer, and hopefully if the marketing is not fulfilling there, I'll go on to become a marketer somewhere else, right? This addiction to brand name, etc., is really spoiling. So I tell people, join a good company, and that company should be where you should think of yourself doing a career there. You should not think of either a brand. You should not think, from there even if I get, somebody in IT told me 25 paisa bhi milega, to he will jump to another job, right? I mean, he actually told me, this boy. He said, all of us know only Java and this and that, how to make login pages. So how does it matter if the next person gives me 25 paisa more? Anything little, I will jump to the other because my job is the same, right? I said, that's not a good way. You should sort of find a way to innovate in your job, find shortcuts, etc. Now, therefore, if you got a large company, you should sort of look at that as an aspirational thing, and you should build your skills on that. And a large company gives you the opportunity to understand processes faster, do better, right? And those are the two benefits. One, the familiar constraints. The second, the large company helps you learn skills if you are willing to anchor yourself a little bit there and you have a clarity of goals. Now, if your family constraint is not, a problem, and therefore you can join a startup, right? That should be the first issue that you should resolve. And second, that startup is, a reasonably interesting one. I'm not even saying well-funded. It's an interesting one where you can challenge yourself with the skill. And you're a person who's a self-driven, because, startups typically will not have much of a structure. And people will suddenly lose their cool and fume on you for not having delivered something, because we'll all make mistakes. If you're willing to put up with this sort of haphazard nature, and also in India, we are not very good at managing together. The Western world has been much better at organizing itself. Ours are like, you see an Indian marriage, you can understand how badly Indian marriages are handled if there is no, an organizer running that. So, that is typically how, startups work. And if you're willing to live with that environment and still enjoy it, it's good. In fact, recently somebody who done from abroad got a big job, joined a startup, but she didn't have the pressure of the family, but she wanted to have this fun environment. And she actually told me that, we are ordering pizza, working late night. I said, that's all fine, but, work is not a party, right? We should use work as a way to prove our capability. And that sort of thinking is also a little dangerous. Some people tell me I'm joining because, I love that excitement of a startup. It looks like a collegial environment, and many startups create it. I'm no harm in keeping a collegial environment, but it should have a clear, method to the madness. Otherwise, we'll all go mad in that. And I've seen many people burn out in startups as well because of this environment. In fact, if you ask me, while my focus with a lot of startups which I help in marketing, my wife many a times complains because I get called late in the night, and so on and so forth. And most of the discussion is about HR problems. I mean, in startups, in fact, I can say 40-50% of my time is invested in, resolving fights between investors, between employees, between, founder, the person they selected who's not happy with the salary. This seems to be, and since many of these are young people, they have not learned many of the HR, it becomes a big problem.
That is so true, sir. I've heard a number of, number of my friends who have done a startup. They tell me like, 60% of the times is being invested in solving that fight.
Correct. Yeah. So you can very well understand why, marriages are also breaking up, because, to tolerate another person, to be able to get work, with empathy, it's not an easy thing. It takes time to learn that, right? We need to have patience. Now you can imagine how difficult it is for a teacher then, to be able to take all the students on the same platform with varying capability. The same thing happens in work as well. And only when we gray, we begin to discover it. I also made mistakes working with people. Luckily I had people who guided me. So you need somebody to guide us, to go through that process so that we can get work out of others smoothly.
Sir, we have got a question from Amrita, and she has asked a question like, sir, what should a person consider while switching a career? I'm not very interested in my current field and I'm considering getting a master's degree in a different field. Please advise.
Okay. Now, I generally suggest, when I'm posed with this sort of question, I'm not happy with what I have now, and I want to do some studies further to get to what I want to. Okay, I suggest to people to read this 1980s article written by Peter Drucker called "Managing Oneself." It's a 10-15 page. It's freely available. You can Google and put "Managing Oneself." Peter Drucker, P-E-T-E-R, Peter, D-R-U-C-K-E-R. Peter Drucker is considered father of modern management. And in the initial pages, he says, never run away from what you dislike. That's not the way you choose your career. Run towards what you would like. Okay. So, I'm not saying what you dislike is, is wrong, etc. There might be a genuine right reason for it. But we should propel ourselves to our goal. Okay, so we should be clear that we have a goal and we are working towards that goal. Okay, many people, it's like I told you about this young girl who said, well, sir, my ultimate goal is Citibank. Okay, I said, what do you want to do in Citibank? And she had no clarity on that. She just wanted to be in Citibank because in the early 2000s it was a great company to be, right? Now that's not the way to look at our career. What is our skill that we want to display wherever we are going to work? Is our skill going to be in marketing? Is our skill going to be in in the engineering skill, or it might be IT skill, whatever. There is a certain skill that we have. It could be communication skill, or it could be HR skill, empathy skill, right? And that is what we want to sort of demonstrate as an improving skill with the processes we learn in the environment that we'll work, whether large or small organization. If we can hone and improve our skill and deliver on that skill, that's how we are creating our value for the world. Then, we can work backwards. So therefore, Peter Drucker advises, so if that is the goal you are working towards, and you will have to, build processes. Only in the work you will build your process, how to improve on that. You need to ask yourself, what is the strength that you really have? Now, that is a very hard task, he says. Most people are not very good at defining their strengths. And it is this lack of ability to define strength that stops us from identifying what will make us good, and being able to contribute on the goals. And now here I will give a small advice on strength. How do you identify and define strengths? Generally in colleges, when I go and interview for selecting into company, I ask people, what is your strength? Okay. So people usually say, I'm good at making friends. Okay. So, this might be a skill that they will say, and, and I ask them, okay, how can you prove yours to me that you're good at making friends? So people find it very hard, right? To say that, sir, I have lots of friends. I'm friendly with lots of them, right? So, you are not in a position to define that strength well, right? So then they will change tack and say, no, I'm good at making friends with strangers. Okay. So then I ask, which is the strangest person that you made friendship with, right? Again, they will have a problem in defining this. What I'm trying to say is that we should be very good at being able to self-interrogate to define our strength. Okay. And typically we divide strength, our skills into two, right? Hard skills and soft skills. And I tell people, as a young person, be very good at defining your hard skills, right? So, there was this boy who came and met me, and I asked him, what is your hard skill you are good at? And he said, I'm very good at, and he thought, because, he wanted to get selected into marketing. And he asked from somebody, this guy is tough with questions, so, be wary. And he probably thought, he will psych me by saying, sir, I'm very good in thermodynamics. Okay. So that is my greatest strength. So he thought, maybe if he said something that I don't know, I will not be able to ask question. And then, of course, he will, so first question I ended up with, so why, if you're good in thermodynamics, why do you want to work in a market research company? But, then I said, let me test if he knows thermodynamics. So I asked him, tell me the second law of thermodynamics, So here I was with 25 years of experience, almost forgotten thermodynamics. And here is a guy who's done a master's in thermodynamics, and he was not able to say any of. Then I said, tell me any law of thermodynamics, right? He was not able to tell any of that. Okay. So, we need not. So I said, you are not fooling me, you're fooling yourself, right? So, truly the first thing we have to tell ourselves is that, we are good in that. So, for example, if somebody said, I'm good in marketing, right? So I asked them, how do you define you're good in marketing? Right? Oh, I know all the concepts in Cliff Kotler. Sometimes they say this. Okay, which is your strongest concept, right? And let's discuss in that strongest concept what all you thought about it, right? Can we apply this in real life? So somebody told me that I'm strong in BCG metrics. There is some, concept like that. Let me not bore you with that. So I said, can you explain that BCG metrics, what axis it is made of? He said, I've forgotten that, right? So, if you don't even remember in the strongest area, your strongest ability, then you're not really strong in that, right? So, we need to interrogate ourselves, what is that hard strength we are really good at? That, second is that soft strength that we have. Maybe it's communication, maybe it is writing skill, right? And how do we figure out our soft skill? Only if other people speak about it. For example, if I said, I'm very good at making friends, the best way I can, get this to be validated is somebody comes and tells me by saying, Mohan, how do you tolerate that terrible fellow? I am not able to tolerate him. Most people here are not able to tolerate him, but somehow you are able to tolerate and get work out of him. What is your secret to, to be able to do that? And if somebody says that, then I know that is really a, friendship skill that I got. I can work with anybody. Right? Rather than saying I can make friends with strangers or anybody, that's a very vague skill, right? So if you can begin to define your true hard and soft skill, then you can say where all the skill can be applied. And then if you like some domain or some sectors, and then gravitate towards educating yourself, learning more in that area, then you will do well in your life. And sooner we are able to do that, because you asked me why did I ended up in market research, and I told you frankly how we all decided when we were youngsters, and most of us also continue to do it. So, I don't therefore grudge you if some of us just wandered around. It happens. All of us will have to wander around until we have a clear sense of, what we are going towards and what is our strength. Some of us take a full lifetime in figuring out. Some of us figure out earlier, and that is, partly luck, partly our ability to do it. So let us not also get angry at ourselves that we are not able to find it. So sometimes, society will have to allow the strain in all of us. So let's also not be hard on us. I hope I sort of been able to explain.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Sir, a number of guys have asked this question, like, what are your thoughts on the present crisis which is right now going on, and how things are changing for people, and how are you personally managing all this stuff?
Okay. So to answer the last question, how am I managing? You can see my wife is a paranoid lady, so she doesn't even allow me to go for a haircut. Okay. So, I'm to that extent. But day before yesterday, I went out. I was in the most crowded place, Arya Samaj Mandir, for one of my friends' marriage. And the priest actually forced all of us to remove our mask and said, Bhagwan bacha lega, right? So I was laughing at myself. And this, the bride, who is a doctor, microbiologist, who works on diagnostic, stuff, and she was also forced to remove. And I thought it was the craziest thing to do, especially when one, day before yesterday, one of my closest employee died of COVID, and he was 2 years younger to me. And so, definitely, there is a whole stream of, problems. And there are people who had mild attack, people who have died. At least I have, a classmate from IIT died. He was the CEO of Camlin. He died of COVID. His father died. So we had all this, and all of us are facing this in our family. We did, my time is mostly online, with students, so it's not, I won't say it's a great experience. I'm learning, I'm innovating, trying new things. But teaching is best done face to face. But, we are okay, and but doing all the time is not going to be fun, is my conclusion. I've tried all types of, online innovations. But engaging people without looking at their emotion is not going to be easy, especially in a class of 40, 50. All of them have switched off their videos, and right now also the only two of us are speaking, and while I'm speaking I can't see you. So these are, limitations. But we are doing it, and it is interesting. Many students later write to me through LinkedIn and ask questions and so on. So we carry on our duties. But we did a research at IIM Lucknow Center for Marketing. We conduct some basic research. We did research as soon as lockdown happened. We did a research last month. The stress levels was as high as, we did it a month into the lockdown. So, stress levels were as high as 60%. And people at that time said they're distracting themselves. And most of our research was middle class. So let me also clarify that we didn't reach, poor people or whatever. So, their condition must be a lot worse. So I can't really talk about them. We saw them in the migration. I'm talking about our class of people. So 60% was the stress level, and the people were distracting themselves, trying to convince they will read and learn something new, or they will distract them in watching TV programming, whatever. But in the last study we did, the stress has gone up to 80%. So clearly there is a greater amount of mental stress that has grown. In India, probably in this middle class, 25% are the salaried class. That's my best guess, because if you look at overall job environment, only 10% is organized job. So clearly, the stress of, reduced salary or losing job is beginning to take a toll. Familial stress, I know lots of people, anecdotally from the surveys we did, husband and wife, cooped up. I sometimes I've seen wives saying, my husband, is always taking away my salary. And now having lost the job, my PF will come and he will take away that PF also. I don't want him to know that. All that, so there's a whole lot of other kinds of crises that are sort of emerging in homes. What we also realized in the second phase of the study, what people said, they will learn creative things like cooking, all that excitement has died down. So I tell people that, we should use this crisis at the personal level in a positive way. We should all influence each other in a positive way. We can't add to the negativity on one, right? So, let us have goals, and let's work to use this crisis as a learning to prepare ourselves for better times. So instead of procrastinating, I've seen, from the survey data, which are running into 1,000 plus, there is an increase in consumption of intoxicants. People are not doing proactive coping strategies. But when I say proactive coping, it is about reading, learning, and all that. So they're not doing as much. So these things, I think, we have to find ways to encourage in people, right? So the government is doing a job of not wanting to bring negative information into the news. That's also not good. We should be more realistic at a public level, that there is a crisis that we are all wanting to, as a country and as a society, want to face it. But when we sort of share this, we should say, let's all do this in a manner that we feel included. We feel that we are contributing to changing in a positive way. I think that is, the message we'll have to do one-on-one with our relatives and families and friends, what we can do in the limited, degrees of freedom we have.
Yes, absolutely, sir. And this COVID time has actually brought me more close to
Yeah,
meditation. I've started thinking about the universe a lot
that's
these
very
days.
good. People doing exercises, right? We can get distracted and waste our time on social media or gaming, etc., but we can also use it productively to learn a lot about the world that is there, because that way internet is a blessing. Yeah.
Sir, we have got another question from Sneha. Sneha has asked that, sir, do you think digital marketing can replace traditional marketing completely in the near future?
Very interesting, difficult questions, Sneha, to answer, because all of us don't carry a crystal ball. Uh, I will tell you how digital marketing will help marketing overall. Uh, take for example, because of COVID, whole lot of online purchases happened. Lots of people have shifted online. I look around my own neighborhood. I find in the morning the growth of GeoMart and Big Basket, and all of them are running around, delivering. Right. I look into my own apartment. There's a whole series of Grofers orange bag lying. All that. Right. So clearly there is a change in habit, but all of it will not happen fully. I do see my local market also coming to life to some extent, but there will be, for certain things, a greater change in habit. People are using digital currency more, and so on. So there is always going to be a directional change. And as we use more and more of these online methodologies, behavior is getting encoded somewhere. You are seeing when and where and why we are, why we may not know, but definitely when and where and what occasion are people, buying or doing whatever activity, even searching and so on and so forth. So, this, with this high amount of data, there is going to be greater need in all companies to understand it and target for marketing. There will also be a blowback from consumers in responding with privacy and so on. So there will always be a technological challenge, but technology will also be bypassed, because consumers will also appreciate if the marketing is helpful to their need, and people do not wantonly stop any digital marketing campaign if it is not beneficial to them. So this all brings to this one point, that do we understand consumers well? Okay. Now, as a teacher, I told that I find it hard beyond a level to appreciate whether the student has learned. For example, I given two suggestions, but I really don't know others have found it useful or not. Right. Many a times in class, people don't say, because other students say don't talk. Right. So there is all this social pressures. So similarly, a lot of times online doesn't lead us to understand the why. Why is something happening, right? Let me give you a very small example. Over the years, many companies have tried to market various solutions for roti making in North India. You ask any housewife in North India, will tell you the most painful task is making rotis. Over the years, children, family eat at different times. Making hot rotis, round rotis, is a very tedious, painful task, and the housewife gets distracted from a chore. And if she's a working housewife, she's even more distracted. Okay, but there is a pressure on her that she has to make these hot rotis and keep it for them. And many solutions have come, tried, etc. And there was even a modern bread which was frozen. Now, if you go and live in US, you will find they're all using rotis out of the freezer. But in India, you will rarely find it. People are just making fresh rotis. And why is it so? Simply because the housewife, even if she's a working housewife, she puts a lot of pressure, guilt on herself. Guilt, fear, whatever, these are all various emotions. Guilt that, if I don't do it and I'm not doing my duty. Fear that if I don't do it, I will lose my control of the family. All these emotions. And these sort of, underlying emotions are very critical for marketers. Okay, and those are not easy to understand. So therefore, typically in marketing, we say the why is more important than what, where, how, when, etc. Understanding why and why not, why somebody would buy and why somebody will not buy, is very, very important. And that is not so easy to get. Maybe in the future we will have plugs that are getting into the brain of human beings, or we have ways to interact online which are very, very immersive, and we can begin to get to the emotion of people. Some part we can understand, like I work with a startup which tries to decode emotions from NLP. So technology will develop, but I am still not convinced that we will understand human emotions and the reasons well. And that is where I think offline methods and meeting people, understanding will continue to exist. So I don't fear this. Um, the traditional marketing, but I do realize that digital marketing will enrich marketing quite a lot. There are a lot of behavioral things that I didn't know, but now I am able to understand. For example, if I have eye tracker, I have a much better sense of developing better packaging for if any of you have purchased Kurkure last 10 years, you would have seen that the Kurkure packet has improved quite significantly. One simple clue I will tell you is that the green button that says it's vegetarian, and the fact that it is a particular flavor, they are very close to each other. Earlier they will be in different corners, and people actually, when they buy Kurkure, never read Kurkure. They know that the pack is Kurkure, but people don't remember that a certain color is a certain flavor. So therefore they actually invest that microsecond reading what is the flavor. And then, in Delhi and these sort of vegetarian places, there is this, mind's foolish behavior to see whether it is vegetarian or not. Checks, right? All this happen in a microsecond, in probably less than a second. But with a, with a eye tracking camera, I can actually reduce the labor that the eye is doing and simplify the packaging design. I'm just giving one application. So technology has helped us improve packaging quite significantly.
Right, sir. So this was really detailed, sir. In terms of we also got to know about some of the highest challenges that we actually face in understanding consumer behavior. Because this actually covered that as well. If you would like to add any other point in that, sir, like what are the difficulties?
The most important challenge in understanding consumer, it's linked to something else we discussed, which is power distance, and which is why India is still not a great country for consumer or marketing. Okay, because in power distance, I tell people, in India, if you get into the road, the truck driver is the biggest man. You're always afraid of the truck. The car fellow is afraid of the truck. The motorcycle fellow is afraid of the car guy. The cycle fellow is afraid of the the motorcycle guy, and the pedestrian is afraid of even a cyclist. He might even hit you while he goes, right? So whereas if you go abroad, your first shock is when you by mistake put your foot on the road, all the vehicles stop, right? You suddenly are quite shocked. Come on, I'm a silly pedestrian. How come you guys are stopping for me? Okay, because Western countries are much less power distance. Now, since we are a high power distance country with great reverence for elderly, etc., we also look down on the consumer. वो तो हमारा product खरीद रहा है, so why should I even bother to listen to him? I know better what he needs. That's how our government also thinks about it, right? Government thinks that it knows how to lock down, right? It doesn't ask us, it doesn't understand. So this is typical behavior. Whichever party comes, it will sort of think like that. So they are the my baap, right? So many entrepreneurs also look down on their customers like that. Who are they? They don't know. I know better what is needed for them. And this ego or this belief, is a very culturally ingrained. And the only way it can be overcome is if we are willing to listen. If you are willing to fully listen. Okay. So I tell people, you go and meet a customer and you don't ask any question. You listen to whatever he says, right? Anything. If you can make a customer speak for 10 minutes non-stop, consider that as an achievement, right? And then later you can ask one small question and let him speak for another 5 minutes, right? So just listen and record everything. If you can, as much as you can record. And if you can fulfill that exercise, then you are ready to, begin to appreciate marketing, So this is the hardest task, in consumer, whether it is B2B or B2C. People are not willing. They're actually getting into judgment. I will tell you a very good example from, from a senior whom I was most inspired by. A lady, one of the earliest, better qualitative researchers in our industry. Qualitative researchers invest a lot of time understanding human psychology. She was working in the time when, one of her biggest crises in the 80s were diarrhea. Children in rural used to die of diarrhea. And we would typically go to villages to understand, what we can do to reduce this diarrhea-based death. People didn't know, what is the solution for diarrhea. And all of you now know that we can use a ORS solution, and so diarrhea is not the reason anybody should die, right? But in India, children below the age of 5 died quite a lot because of diarrhea. So when she went to the village to do these sort of researches, and typically in the 80s, if you have to go to a village and interview, and they thought they should interview the women, because women are closest to the child who's 1 to 5 years, and to interview women in a village, you have to take the the permission of the mukhya. And here is a lady, typically in those times when we went to rural India, women won't wear skirts and jeans and all, so they will try to be modestly dressed, knowing our country rural side. So despite that, obviously the city woman is different from the rural woman. I'm taking, let's say, village in deep Haryana, let's say, or somewhere in UP. The mukhya actually said, madam, sometimes they even say sir, right? Because they don't even consider a urban woman in those days as a feminine gender. For them, everybody who comes from town is some man, some sir, right? So they said, hamara aurat se kyun baat karna chahte? Why do you want to speak to our women? Don't you see, just look at their head, they have very small heads. They have half the size of a man's brain. So they have nothing to tell you. What will you do to learn from them, right? Now, typically, a response for a non-researcher would be to get really angry, right? How dare you said this about a woman? Don't you know there are Marie Curie was a Nobel Prize winner, and so on. We can argue, it's a very foolish response, but he is uneducated. This is knowledge. But, for a researcher, this is, what we call as gold dust. Because what it tells you is the man in the village has decided that he only has, authority over knowledge. Women have no knowledge or no capability for knowledge. So decision, even for the child, will be made by the man, right? So, the man becomes a gatekeeper and a barrier for even a simple knowledge of ORS solution is needed to treat a diarrhea, right? Now, the brain of the researcher will work on how can I bypass this man with the prejudices, or what are the prejudices these men have about, diagnosing diseases, or how we can use this sort of prejudiced men to solve the problem of diarrhea, right? And this all requires a listening mind, which is not a judgmental mind. Because, I'm not here at that moment to try and change that man's judgment about a woman and a man, right? So this is a very hard task, not being judging, being able to diagnose from the information what probably must be happening in the mind is a great task, any psychiatrist, psychologist, or for that matter, a market researcher should be doing. I hope I've answered what is the most difficult skill, listening and being able to take that on the face value without judging.
Right, sir. Sir, I have a small question for you. Like, a lot of edtechs have actually, emerged, especially in these COVID times, and won't take specific names. But what do you think, like, in terms of the options that the students have, the number of options have actually increased, but the focus and, the clarity with which a student should actually approach a concept, that seems to have increased, or that has actually decreased with all the options you have at hand?
So, education is a very, very large field. It's one of the largest industry worldwide, right? So there is, there's no dearth. And if you look at in India, we have shortage of teachers everywhere, right? And we also have, poor quality in general. So, I won't therefore say that there are just too many edutechs. There can be many bad edutechs. There can be edutechs which are, wrongly targeting audiences with the wrong courses. So that can be possible and quite true as well. You're right, because it's also a very tough sector, right? People have found their ways to make money in this sector, and some of really making too much money as well. And I'm sure all of us will agree with that. So since it's a large sector, it is worthwhile to have lots of people coming in. But it also means that those who are entering should be very clear why they are entering, right? And whether they have a segment that they can target, where they can sustainably target, and they can get a return for that effort that they're putting, right? My only urging to most of the entrepreneurs, India woefully lacks in quality. So can you do something to improve quality? Especially in education, we lack quality. So I generally urge people, don't just get in because you have nothing else to do. Because lots of people do tuition because there's no job available, you do it. I can't stop you from doing it. But if you're doing that also, can you be innovative? Can you try to be the best tuition teacher until, somebody is found? So therefore, for that, you have to look everywhere, learn everywhere, and do that. So that's from the supply side. From the demand side, for a lot of people, let's look at some brand that has become very popular that bombards everybody with advertising, and I'm sure they're making a lot of money. One of my colleague daughter, she was under a lot of pressure because she's just a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, whatever. Everybody in their class were taking this this course, so she was feeling left out. So therefore she forced, and they spent some 85,000 on that. Okay. And I also see the other way. If you go to any school PTA meeting, you'll realize mothers are so stressed. They're running their children this is before the COVID times. They're running their children from um, tennis class to karate class to painting class to mathematics class, and so on and so forth. Every other mother is meeting at these places and getting worked up that my child will not make it to IIT or will not get into medical. God knows, they have all types of aspiration, or will not become next the whatever tennis champion or whatever. So this Clayton Christensen has told something very, very apt for us. He says, let's take the best cricketer who have come in the last 10 years, 20 years. If you go and ask them, did their parents force them into cricket academy? Most of them would have said no. They themselves got interested. And so that's what Clayton Christensen says, that until unless parents invoke a goal-seeking habit in the children, then the next steps are not going to be useful. So they should be clear about the goal. So for example, we as a kids were, very interested in scoring well in the, local cricket match, right? So, therefore, if you want to go and join there, you need to have a bat or ball. And if none of the kids, we were all poor kids at that time, didn't have, we found a way to make a bat from the, from the trees that were there. We cut and made bats. We used the, paper roll rubber bands from tire tubes to create, rubber balls, right? So his point is, resources will be found if the goals are clear. And what a kid has to learn is the process. The skill is basically the process, how to be a good cricketer, right? But, a parent's job is really about motivating, to get to sort of agree that that is the goal. So in this case also, when the child wanted to do some whatever online computer course without naming it, the parent should have, not pushed her because the other friends are doing it, or because, the parents want the child to not get left out. Many parents say, oh, I should give them all the resources. Maybe they should attend cricket class, chess class, tennis class, badminton class. Maybe they will become good in one of them. Until they do it, how will they know, right? But that's foolish. That is like providing resources before the goals are clear. So the parent job is to actually motivate the child for the goals. If they can figure out what is it that excites them, because then they will themselves find ways to go to the resource. That is where you need to provide the money, because they are motivated to do it. And if they're motivated to do that, you have provided the resource, then they will work hard to pick up the process, right? And this is the same thing we have to do for the grown-ups also. Now there is no parent there, but all of us are going to a parent and say, why don't you buy an iPhone 12 for us, right? Instead of iPhone 12, ideal thinking should be, okay, I want to spend 1 lakh on iPhone 12, but is there anything better I can spend on 1 lakh? That's a resource, but what has it got to do with my goals that I got in my life? So is there something that resource can be better utilized for the goal that I got? Maybe you will come up with some 10 options, and from the 10 option, you might choose the best option out of that. Maybe that is not an iPhone 12 then. No, I don't know. So it might be an iPhone 12 as well, because somebody might find that useful to achieve their goals that they got. But that's the way we have to, at the demand side. Somewhere a lot of us are getting pressured by, comparison or pressured by being left out. Oh, if I don't do it, so everybody wants to do, for example, nowadays data science. Okay, they feel that if they did data science, they'll get a better job. So I asked them, are you good in maths? Are you good in statistics? Are you good in programming? Do you think you will enjoy it? Right? A lot of people in my management class have done computer science before that. Why did they do computer science? Because the parents said, that's the most happening field they should join. So they joined an engineering college in computer science. And then they worked for 2 years. I said, why did you leave that? Oh, sir, it was very boring. I was making only login pages and it was not exciting. What do you want to do after the MBA? No, sir, definitely not IT. I want to do something else, right? So this sort of lack of clarity leads us to a lot of wastage. As I said earlier, I don't want to hurt all of you. I mean, all these mistakes we all make in our lives. But maybe the sooner we realize where our goals and strength lie, the better will be ours. So this sort of crisis time, we should use this to hone our goals better. Maybe meditation there will help us. A lot of us don't have our time. Most of us are so busy, in social media to fill our time with something that is not boring. And that kills us this ability to think for ourselves. That might be a good advice, if at all. I think now Chetan Bhagat is also telling that, so you should sort of definitely listen. He's a youth icon, not me.
Right. So Chetan Bhagat was very frustrated some days back. Actually, many people were trying to pull him down.
He was very angry with you young people.
Whatever so, sir, I do.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
But I do respect his courage and do respect his marketing insights a lot, sir. Like,
No, he understands the young people of India much better than most of us. So, definitely, he's close to a lot of people. Somebody is needed to understand and appreciate the emotional problems and, crisis that a young India goes through, right? Parents always are, like me, teachers are always judgmental and telling. But somebody needs to speak in the youth's language to be able to penetrate and understand. First, we have to appreciate that language of the youth, right? To empathize before we can even advise. And that he does a very great job of. He's opened up space for a lot of young authors, especially in English. So we should sort of appreciate him for that. Yes.
He has actually motivated a number of people to start writing.
Definitely.
Sir, I would like to take your viewpoint, your opinion on one thing. Like, a number of people do different things all across India. Let's talk about India. So if you talk about 25 B schools, let us suppose 25 B schools, there are 25 into 500 students who have got different personalities doing different things in a completely different way. Do you think, sir, there is a time where we have to cross-utilize the resources to make one person sitting in a particular institute aware about, what all the other people across are doing it? Can we create such kind of a platform, and how helpful it can be?
Definitely. See, when internet was, getting popular, one of my friend, now he's a dean in one of the large MBA institute, started, created a startup, which was to network all these alumnus of, IITs or alumnus of IIMs. And he wanted to, build some sort of, useful network, okay, where people can benefit from it. People have tried in the past. People have, there are lots of portals still available. Okay. Many of them finally either, get reduced to some sort of MBA institute admission portals or whatever. What I'm saying is that there is a definite need to network on common interest. That requires a better understanding of all of this. The starting point is, I don't therefore have a this is what it should look like to, bring people onto a common platform. I don't think you can bring everybody onto the same common platform, but maybe that platform can aggregate us and take us to common interest groups, right? Now, how is that possible? Whether it is feasible? These are things that, will have to be tested out by understanding. But there is a need there. I mean, if I look at my own, alumni network at IIT, or FMS, these are, reasonably defunct and not working. At best, the only group that works is my batch group on WhatsApp. Okay. Beyond that, I don't see great advantages. Or, there is one IIT group across all IITs, but that was created in Delhi. But mostly it is among entrepreneurs who want to seek help from each other in recruitment and technical. But it's so all of you know how bad it is to operate on a WhatsApp. Okay, it's quite terrible, right? I mean, you don't get to see it all the time. You miss something, and it is not structured, it's not organized. So you can clearly see people are coming together, but there is no clear, good, useful resource to help people, to bring them to some common similar purposes. So bringing everybody together to one purpose, forget it. That looks very right-wing and dictatorial. I'm fascist. I find lots of people say that, we should bring everybody together to do this great thing for the nation. It doesn't happen. It's a very large country. Each one has a certain ambition and a future, and you will have to help aggregate so that they themselves decide for themselves. Right? So if you can have the service mentality, and I'm sure there is an opportunity to bring groups of people together to work on common interest. Right? And India lacks clubs. Clubbing culture is missing in India. If you see, if at all, Indians go to temples or they go to, bars, right? There is no, serious club culture. In the West, they have, common interest clubs and all that. We haven't developed it. There's hardly, any good club we can go to. And if they are there, then it is, what nowadays we sort of derisively call, like a Khan market gang, elitist clubs that are there. In Delhi, then you will have to stand in line for years, get somebody's, signature, and you need to be well known to get it, right? So it's like a, selection only club, right? So, the clubbing culture has not grown. I've seen lots of online common groups on digital, let's say data scientists, but it fizzles out very fast, right? So people haven't found the way to, make this regular common groups.
Right, sir. Sir, so we'll take a last question, and because we have already taken a lot of time from sir. So Sudipti has asked a question, and since he's in the final year, so what she's asking is that once I enter into the company, what should I do for the first 3 months to make sure that I actually establish a good reputation for myself?
Okay. So she's joined a company, right? This is Deepthi, right? Deepthi has joined a company.
Sudipti.
She's Sudipti. Okay. Very, very, nice and kind of you to think in this manner. Most people, I joke to people. The generation Y went to a company and said, "What can I get out of this company?" In the sense, are they sending me? In fact, I've seen people write to their alumnus, which is a nice place. They take you for training. What can I shop there? What sort of colleagues do I have? Right? Are they exciting boys and girls? So that's what I sort of one junior once showed me. This is what is the discussion we are having on MBA Universe and all that. Okay, but it's good kind of you to think what you should do in the first 3 months to establish. I think, typically organizations over the years have reduced the training program, partly because of two reasons, I tell. One, organizations somehow feel that, investing in a long-term training program, is not very helpful because, people just simply leave very soon. So therefore they cut down and scale down on training program. Second is, all these companies have put themselves into the hyper competitive mode. They put all these ratings, 5-point rating. So people, who get low rating get angry, and it's not their fault they get low rating because HR somewhere says everybody has to be divided from alpha to epsilon. And that is demeaning because I can be an epsilon 1 year and I can be alpha, but when you are younger, the boss will come, and say you're good, but you can be better. And they will give some rating called very good, but what they did with the salary, either there were very little difference among us, or if they did something high for somebody, that person deserved it and he was told never to talk about the salary. Everybody, in fact, none of us knew each other's salary. But in the last 10 years, everybody shares their salary increment, and that puts lots of pressure. And when people get annoyed, they run away. So all this package has led to lots of attrition, lot of anger, and people don't, and there's little training, and then there's too much pressure on people. So I tell people, you'll have to learn to bear and at least stick around in any one place for sometime longer. Of course, if they don't give you more skill, then better to move. So your focus should be on building skills, and if you can sort of focus on that rather than worry about increments and all that. And in trying to build the skills, you should, have an empathy and sort of team ability to work within team. Okay, it's easier said than done. I typically found, in the last few years, people are all in their own world. When we joined, there was no computer facing us. If you have to work on a computer, you have to go to the computer center. There's a separate place where computers are kept. The rest of the time, we are on the desk. Therefore, we interacted with each other, spoke to each other. So I tell people, if you can, reduce our ego, build a sense of community, empathize and like each other, right? And that can only come if we lower our own ego, right? Many a times we are demanding others to appreciate us. If we can sort of turn it around and say, can I appreciate others, right? So if we begin to appreciate others, the world will begin to appreciate us. So many people tell me, can I get training? I say, have you trained anybody? Have you helped anybody? So if you can sort of do to others what others you expect to do, your 3 months can be more exciting, and you can build this trust and relationship, and they will start providing you. So you can be a curious learner, right? You can ask, what is it? And you can, oh, this is so wonderful. You are good at this, it looks so tough. How do you do that? How did you go about? So people love to talk about their experiences, their expertise. If you can encourage that, I'm not saying we are exploiting their, free sense. Most people hardly get to be heard, right? We are teachers, we are always heard. But most people are not teachers. There's hardly any opportunity to be heard by others. So if you can be this listener, to hear, people value that. So if you can hear, listen, encourage others, be empathetic towards that, appreciate them, and be focused on the skill that you want to gain in that job. Whatever skill. I remember somebody said, we need to send this 20 couriers, to these 20 cities across the country. I don't have anybody. Can you do it? Okay. No, I simply took that task. I said, okay, no problem. I have to go, but I will, spend another 20 minutes and do this for you. Right. I didn't protest by saying, how dare you ask me? So there was one lady who, joined us. She came to my room. And she said, how dare this person is asking me to, send this 20 couriers. In market research, in those days, we have to, like, late evening, we'll be ready to send couriers. So, this was the usual thing. And he asked her. Unfortunately, that boy told her, your handwriting is so great. Can you write? Right? She took offense to that. How dare you think my handwriting is trying to manipulate me? Probably he didn't say in the right way, right? But that's okay. So, she could have sort of done that. It doesn't harm you to do that, and maybe there is something to be learned even from a manipulative person, right? So I tell people, maybe the first 3 months you should be flexible rather than get into judgment, and try to use this opportunity to pick up skills. And if you do that, you will win trust. And among the several skills that you might learn, you will figure out some skills are best suited for you. You are good at it. And that's the way I think a lot more training happens. In fact, even in those days when there were long training, most of the learning happened in the informal environment, because classroom environment don't prepare you for most of your work in the job. It is this sort of interacting with others, learning from them, they teaching you, that you pick up a lot of skills.
That is so true, sir. And so I will tell you one small incident that actually happened to me just 3 days back. I was talking to one person and I was just telling him how important is mentoring and this interaction with people all around. And he told me, like, I have not met, and he had a career spanning about 15, 20 years around. He told me he has not met any person inside the industry till now who has actually, mentored him, helped him learn some skills. I am so proud to say that in this small career of 5, 6 years, whatever I had, I have met great people in my life who have always taken that pain to come forward and tell me, Rishikesh, this is the feedback that I have for you, and please take it and go back home and start learning it. I'm really proud of this thing, sir. I'm really proud of being connected to people like you who take out time, without any consideration, and have been helping a lot of people all around, have been motivating youngsters. Maybe now I'm kind of a middle-aged person because I'm already going to enter into my 30s. So, you have been motivating all of us, and we really look forward to people like you, and we really look forward, to learn a lot from your humility, so that when we reach your level, we can also set up such kind of an example for the youngsters who are coming from back, and we can actually feel, what are all the challenges that they actually go through. Thank you, sir, for taking out time, and thanks a lot for always being, so humble, and always finding out time to interact with all of us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, sir.
Thanks. All the best to you. I'll be happy to help in whichever way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and take care, sir.
Thank you. Take care.